Hi and welcome back to Like Maria. Today I'm going to look at another poem of the decade. This time it's Sinéad Morrissey's poem Genetics. So this will be really good for A Level English Literature if you're doing the Edexcel Pearson syllabus, and otherwise just come along for the journey because it's a really interesting poem. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. So I'm going to look at this poem through the lens of an exam question. Not a comparative one like you'll get in the exam, but just an exam question. We'll do one side of it. So how does the poet explore relationships in genetics? I'm going to look at three relationships that the poet explores. The relationship between the voice in the poem and the parents. The relationship between both parents and each other. And then the relationship between the voice and the you that comes in at the end of the poem that this monologue is clearly addressed to. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the relationship between the voice and the parents. So straight away we get a physical sense of this relationship, that she sees her own body, and in particular she uses this central image of the hands, that it relates her back to them. She talks in the final stanza about bequeathing fingers and bequeathing palms to the next generation, and she clearly feels here that she has been bequeathed her father's fingers and her mother's palms. And I think this is a positive relationship here. She looks at them with pleasure. She is delighted that she is able to still see them in her and still have them with her constantly. And I think that this is a recognition that they have created her identity for her. Of course, our hands are particularly identifiable by fingerprints. We look down at them a lot of the time. They are a very important part of us. We do so much with our hands. And here she is a physical embodiment of her parents. She's seeing attributes of her parents in her own hands and connecting back at them in this way. I think here Morrissey's choice of the villanelle form, this very strict fixed form with the repetition of the rhymes palms, hands, lands, palms, hands, all throughout the poem, is recognising that this is a kind of fixed relationship, that whatever happens to the parents, the child is the produce of their relationship and their interweaving together. And it's the same as this poem. This poem is structured with interweaving lines, with repetition. The villanelle was originally a dance form, and you can imagine people moving together. It was a ballad-like form, kind of dealing with the stories of life perhaps, and the dance of life even, we could extend it to that. And she says here, she's kind of got a yearning to know more about her parents. She says, at least I know their marriage by my hands. I have evidence here. I am the evidence of their marriage. And she is kind of recreating the marriage that perhaps she doesn't know about or has dissolved now, and as they've become separate people, she's craving knowledge of that and kind of reproduction of her identity here in the physicality of the poem on the paper, in the same way that she feels that she is a reproduction of their identity with her hands. So I think here she's reaching out to make a relationship with her parents by writing this poem and having the comfort of the poem here. She can look at the poem with pleasure, she can speak the poem with pleasure. This is her connecting back to her parents. So I want to talk now about the parents' relationship with each others. Obviously they are separated. We get this very early on in the second stanza. We get that caesura there with separate hemispheres. Paws may sleep with other lovers. We've got the separate lands separated in the first line of that second stanza. So here the second stanza is very kind of staccato-like, with those pauses there in the first and second lines. They are separated. I think the poet seeks to join them together with the villanelle form. There is a joining and a parting with the sort of ebb and flow of the rhyme scheme here. And I think there is a recognition here that the parents may have parted from each other. There is nothing left but the togetherness, but friends, so there's nothing left of their relationship, but she's bringing them back together in this poem. In me they touch, fingers link to palms. It cannot be denied. This is indelible proof that they did have a marriage and that they were together. She uses that phrase marriage register, which is a written document, which I think again points to the fact that she here is kind of creating the marriage register in this poetry, in this words that the voice in the poem is speaking, that she is therefore ratifying the marriage in a different way, not in the way of the physical marriage register and the legal document, but there is a more emotional, spiritual marriage register which is here in the poetry. And this is from the past, this relationship, but the parents' relationship is still active in the eyes of the voice in the poem because she is creating it here. So although they may have been repelled, and that's quite a strong word, like using the terminology again of science of magnetic, two magnets repelling each other, they might have separated, but they have come together with her, and that cannot be changed. So I think here the exploration of relationships, if we go back to the essay question, is very much the different types of relationships, the relationships according to legal, emotional, the differences between these, and the different viewpoints on relationships, that even though a marriage or relationship may have finished, it is still, those people are still together in other ways in life. The last relationship I'd like to talk about today is the relationship between the voice and you that is introduced at the end of the poem. The pronoun you here comes in that first line of the final stanza. Until then, the reader is not aware that there is an internal audience for this poem. So this makes it really a dramatic monologue being spoken in front of an audience, and this you is being addressed. And being addressed quite sternly, it was quite assertively, with these imperatives. So take me, take up. There is a plea here. I want you to do what my parents did. I want to do it with you. She talks about mirroring in bodies of the future, and this fixes our mind back onto the villanelle form, which is after all about mirroring and repetition. It takes us back in that line, my fingers and your palms. I'll bequeath my fingers if you bequeath your palms. That's very reflective of the first line of the poem. So just as the poetry mirrors lines throughout, she wants to be mirroring bodies of the future and continuing this villanelle, continuing what she sees as a type of poetry into the future by producing children. I think it's very interesting here how the poet moves from I to we. The poet is, or the voice in the poem is moving on a journey throughout this poem. She begins in a very philosophical tone regarding her hands and thinking about the relationships, but then she is quite adamant at the end. We know our parents make us by our hands. The present tense there, make us. In the first stanza, it's my parents made me, but now we've moved to the present tense. And these assertive imperatives, take me, take up the skin. This is a real plea. If you do this, I'll do this, to move on to the next stage of life. She has been philosophical and now she wants action. She's in the present tense. We know our parents make us by our hands. The use of those plural pronouns, first person pronouns, we and us, joining together with another person in order to progress to this next stage of life. So there we have the three relationships. I'm going to go on now to talk a little bit about poetic technique on the next slide. I just want to reflect on how the poet does this. I've mentioned all these things in the previous discussion, but I just want to pull them out. The importance of poetic technique can not be avoided here, and I really want you to note the first person voice, the evolution of this voice from first person singular to first person plural, and in that final stanza, the inclusion of an internal audience. All this is really important for the monologue form, to make you realise that this voice in the poem is working through issues. She looks at her hands in a very philosophical, reflective tone, but then she moves forward towards wanting action and moving on to the next stage of life. I've talked extensively about the villanelle form. Please do go away and look that up. It's really important that you understand the interweaving of these lines and the technicalities of the response so you can make useful comments about that. I think key here is the idea of the repetition and the cyclical nature of the villanelle, reflecting the dance of life, but also reflecting the interweaving of lives, the looking back at the past and looking forward to new creation. This, of course, is all achieved by the central physical image of the hands, which are key here. The poet talks about actually looking at the hands and reenacting certain things. There is a childish naivety to this, which then dies out with the more adult moving towards the skin's demands, and the culmination of the relationship and the realisation that she wants to move forward. So that central image of the hands is really important, the joining together of things. I would say that this poem is really important in the same way that the poet reflects on the hands and is able to see the previous marriage and look forward to a marriage producing children. Here she is looking back and forward in the same way in the poem, in the same way that the hands do. So the poem itself kind of becomes the document of these relationships. So here I've just popped up a short paragraph that could serve as an introduction to this essay. I'm going to read it out, follow through with me, and it might be a springboard for you to start your own writing about this poem. Morrissey explores the idea that children are the real custodians of their parents' relationship and can pass on this precious role to the next generation. Her villanelle documents the ups and downs of past relationships and ends in a plea to forge a new one and create new life. So there you have it, Sinéad Morrissey's Genetics. Make sure you reread the poem and spend a little time thinking about what I've just told you. Please like and subscribe, and I look forward to you listening in next time.